The secret. Behind the scars of the giant. Everyone feared, but a child saw the light in him. Folks whispered whenever Jonas Bear Callahan's shadow crossed their path. He was the sole survivor of a fire that leveled his home, a soldier who came back from the Mexican War, and the reason people stepped aside on Main Street. The scars across his face and shoulders spoke of a past no one dared ask about. But one day, down a dusty road, an orphan girl named Elsie May appeared. She didn't see the monster the town imagined. She saw a man in silence, aching for someone to call his name. "Bear," Elsie said softly, and the whole town froze. In that small voice, the fate of Dust Creek began to shift. At the edge of Dust Creek, where the fields of brittle grass stretched clear to the horizon, stood a crooked shack, lonely as the man who lived inside it. Folks called him Jonas Bear Callahan, a giant of a cowboy whose shadow, when he stood in the street, stretched longer than the saloon's porch. Few dared meet his eyes. Bear had once been a hero. In the war with Mexico, his name made the papers, a man who carried his comrades through smoke and fire. They said he held off a cavalry troop with nothing but an old rifle, buying his men time to escape. But war leaves more than glory. It tore into Bear's flesh with scars and carved deep shadows into his mind. When he came home, Dust Creek didn't greet him as a hero. His house had burned to ash, his wife and child gone without goodbye. From that day, Bear kept to himself, hiding beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his beard thick enough to bury the face once admired by women across the valley. To the town, Bear was a ghost, a living reminder of what war costs. Some pitied him, others feared him. Whenever he walked down Main Street, the chatter died. Children were yanked indoors, and cowboys in the saloon stared hard into their mugs. No one spoke. Bear didn't mind. Each day he patched the roof, split firewood, and by night he sat before the fire, holding a scorched photograph of the family he'd lost. His eyes were endless wells fixed on something forever gone. To Dust Creek, Jonas Callahan was nothing but a chained bear, a ghost prowling the prairie. Rumor claimed Bear had no heart, that his icy stare could freeze a man where he stood. But the truth was, deep in that giant's chest, his heart still beat, slow, heavy, and untouched since the day of his loss. No one guessed that a single small hand, a single bright voice, would shatter the walls he had built. That moment came the next morning. The dawn sky over Dust Creek gleamed clear, as if scrubbed clean by the night's rain. Mist hung low over the weeds, sunlight creeping across the warped shingles of Bear's shack. He had just tied a bundle of wood when he heard footsteps, light, nothing like the heavy boots of men. Bear turned. There stood a little girl, maybe 5 years old, her brown hair wild from the wind, her cheeks smudged with dust. She clutched a battered wooden horse, its paint chipped but treasured like gold. Her wide eyes met his without a flicker of fear. "Can I call you Bear?" Her voice rang bright, slicing through the silence that had bound him for years. Bear froze. No one in Dust Creek dared say that name to his face. To them, Bear meant beast, shadow, curse. But from the lips of a child, it sounded tender, almost gentle. His voice scraped from disuse. You're not afraid of me?" She shook her head, hugging the horse tighter. "No, I think you're just sad." The words struck him harder than any bullet. He had grown used to sidelong looks, to fear. Yet here, for the first time, someone, just a child, saw not a monster, but a man weighed down by sorrow. Inside his chest, his stone-bound heart trembled. A crack, a glimmer of light. Her name was Elsie May, orphaned, drifting through the town on scraps of kindness, her wooden horse the only gift her mother left her, the friend she whispered to each night. Bear listened, his rough hands curling into fists. A strange feeling rose in him, the urge to protect, tangled with the terror he might fail. He knew well what the town would say if anyone came near him. But in Elsie's eyes, there was no fear, only trust. So on that prairie morning, a giant cowboy and a small orphan stood across from one another, two souls cast off by fate, yet finding in each other what the world had denied: understanding. Jonas Bear Callahan wouldn't admit it, but a fragile spark had been struck in his heart, and it would change everything. If you were standing there, whose side would you choose? A. Jonas Bear Callahan, the lonely cowboy. B. Elsie May, the child with unshaken faith. Or perhaps another choice? Share your thoughts. I want to know you're still riding with this story. In the days that followed that fateful morning, Dust Creek began to witness something strange. Down the dusty road leading to the crooked shack where Jonas Bear Callahan hid away, folks often saw a small figure skipping along. It was Elsie May, her brown hair tangled by wind, her shoes worn thin, her arms clutching a small cloth bundle. Inside that bundle were always a few warm biscuits, tucked in by Clara Duval, the innkeeper's wife. "Take these to Bear," she would sigh, shaking her head. "Lord knows that man hasn't eaten a decent meal in years." And off the girl went, never minding the stares, never caring for the whispers behind her back. Bear saw her the second time on his porch. He thought the first visit had been chance, but that morning the smell of biscuits slipped through the cracks of his battered door. Elsie set the bundle on his table, then plopped herself onto a chair, her legs swinging free. "Eat, Bear. Miss Clara says they're not too sweet." He hesitated. Kindness was a language long forgotten to him. Yet those bright eyes left no room for refusal. He tore off a piece, the simple sweetness lodging in his throat. It had been years since anything had reminded him of home. Elsie tilted her head, curious. "Bear, what did you used to do? They say you were a soldier, right?" The question cut like a knife into old wounds. His broad hand tightened around a tin cup. After a long silence, his voice came rough, low. "Yeah, I was. But before the war, I was just a carpenter's boy." "A carpenter?" she echoed. He nodded, eyes flickering with a rare light. He spoke of afternoons in his father's shop, learning how to hold a chisel, how to listen to the song of wood beneath the saw. "Pa said wood's got a soul. If you listen, it'll tell you what it wants to be." For a moment, his voice wasn't cold and broken. It flowed gentle, like a hidden creek through stone. Elsie hugged her wooden horse tighter, whispering, "Maybe you should listen again. Maybe the wood still has something to tell you." Her innocence jolted him. Memories buried in ash stirred alive. He glanced at his calloused hands and wondered, maybe they could still build something other than pain. That morning, in the crooked shack on the edge of Dust Creek, an old memory was awakened, thanks to the fearless heart of a little orphan. For the first time in years, Bear didn't feel entirely alone. By afternoon, the sun cast long golden streaks across Bear's porch. The warped boards groaned under the wind, threatening collapse. Bear stripped off his coat, hammer in hand, ready to mend the roof. As always, Elsie was there, scurrying about, her tiny hands proudly holding the box of nails like a seasoned helper. "Hand me a long one," Bear muttered. She nodded and darted to an old cabinet. Dust swirled as she yanked it open. Inside, among rusted boxes and scraps, something caught her eye. A tarnished silver badge, a 5-pointed star with worn edges, still bearing the words, Deputy Sheriff. Bear, her voice trembled with awe. Is this yours? The hammer froze mid-swing. His shoulders stiffened. Slowly he turned, his gaze shadowed. Put it back, Elsie. His tone left no space for question, but she didn't shrink. She lifted it into the sunlight, and the star glinted as if alive. You were a deputy. You protected this town? The words struck like a shot. Bear exhaled, stepping closer, eyes locked on a past he had buried. Yeah, long ago. But no one here wants to remember. Elsie's eyes shone. I want to remember. A man who once protected others could never just be a ghost. Simple words, but they shook him to the core. He had believed his past nothing but a stain, forgotten by all. Yet here was a child, untainted by scorn, who saw in him not shame, but a guardian. The prairie wind rattled the porch, carrying smoke and dry grass. Bear sat with the badge heavy in his palm, familiar, foreign. His heart pounded slow, but Elsie's faith poured into its hollow chambers like fire. Will you protect me? She whispered. Not a child's game, but a plea. Bear looked at her. No longer just a farm waif. She was a spark, fragile yet fierce, against the darkness closing in on Dusty Hollow. He knew enemies still roamed, the border raiders, the same devils who had left blood and smoke in their wake, and they'd be back. Bear rose, his massive frame casting shadow over her. I ain't sheriff no more, he rasped, but if they come, they'll not touch you. The rumor galloped through town like wildfire. In the saloon by the well, across the marketplace, folks whispered Bear, the man who once cast his badge into the mud, had picked it up again. Some sneered, saying his soul was rotted through, but others dared to hope that maybe this town hadn't yet bowed to darkness. Night fell, hoofbeats thundered from the horizon, dust swirling under silver moonlight. A gang rode into Dusty Hollow, guns glinting. Their leader, a long-haired brute with a scar across his face, bellowed, Dusty Hollow! We've come to collect what's owed! Resist, and you die! Silence. Doors stayed shut. Not a soul moved. Until the heavy steps of Bear echoed down Main Street. He walked slow, each stride striking like thunder, eyes locked on the scarred outlaw. Enough, Bear's voice rang like iron. This town's bled enough. If you want blood, take mine. The air snapped tight. Silence. Then gunfire split the night. Flames of muzzle flash tore the dark. Elsie screamed. From behind cracked shutters, townsfolk peeked. They saw Bear, once thought broken, standing tall, his revolver blazing, shielding Dusty Hollow. Blood spilled, dust rose, but Bear's hand never shook. One by one, the raiders fell, until only the scarred leader reeled back into shadow, retreating with rage burning in his eyes. When the smoke cleared, the townsfolk spilled out. Bear stood in the street, shoulders bowed, the silver badge slick with blood in his fist. Elsie darted to him, eyes shining with tears. See, I told you, she panted. You still can. Bear knelt, pulling her close. For the first time in years, his eyes blurred, not with defeat, but with the weight of a reason to rise again. Through the midnight wind, the prairie whispered. Dusty Hollow was no longer abandoned. Its guardian had returned. If you were there, whose side would you choose? A. Jonas Bear Callahan, the cowboy haunted by his past. B. Elsie May, the child whose faith never wavered. Or would you choose another? Share your thoughts. I want to know you're still riding with this story. By noon that day, Dust Creek lay beneath a veil of red dust. The prairie wind carried a dry sting that slammed doors shut on squeaking hinges. Folks were bent over their daily work when the sound of hooves echoed down the main road. Slow, steady, heavy with the weight of strangers. 3 riders came into town. At the front rode a tall, gaunt man in a black duster, his wide-brim hat shadowing half his face. His eyes cut sharp as a knife, sizing up each townsman with cold calculation. This was Silas Blackthorne, a name unheard of in Dust Creek, but one look was enough to know he wasn't common stock. The 2 men trailing him wore fine clothes, feigning polish, but the way their hands gripped the reins, the way their eyes scanned the street, betrayed them. These weren't traders. They were men who lived by the gun. The horses halted before the old saloon, the heart of the town's whispers. Blackthorne stepped down, brushed dust from his coat, and let a thin smile curl across his lips. Well now, Dust Creek, land this wide and so few folk to claim it. What a waste. From his pocket he pulled a fresh stack of bills, slapping it onto the bar the way a man tosses meat to hounds. We've come from the east, representing investors. Anyone willing to sell their land will get more than any other offer. No need to worry about food on the table ever again. The words drifted like smoke through the room. Heads lifted, eyes flickered. In a town where coin was scarce, money spoke louder than any sermon. Blackthorne knew it, and he played the tune well. I hear the land here ain't just fertile, one of his men added smoothly. There's water underground. Would be a shame to let it go to waste. Tension spread like wildfire. Some folks glanced at one another. Others dropped their gaze to the floor, hands trembling. No one dared refuse. No one dared agree. Everyone knew men who came with money and guns weren't here for the good of the town. Blackthorne's grin sharpened. His eyes swept the saloon, landing on a faded board nailed to the wall, an old list of deputy sheriffs. He raised a brow, smirked. I heard this town once had a fine protector. Where's he now? Ashes, I reckon. The room grew thick as tar. A few eyes flicked toward the far edge of town, where a crooked shack still stood silent, Jonas Bear Callahan's refuge. But no one spoke. Blackthorne chuckled, scooped up his bills, and tossed a few notes to the floor. Think it over. We'll be back, and the wise ones'll know which choice to make. Their hoofbeats thundered away, leaving Dust Creek choking in dust, and with it, a new weight pressing down on every chest. A storm had just ridden in, and no one knew what it would sweep away. That night, the saloon grew quiet. Prairie wind whistled through town, carrying the tang of dust and the bitter smell of gunmetal. Jonas Bear Callahan sat in a shadowed corner, brim pulled low. He rarely set foot here, but tonight Sheriff Caleb Boone had sent for him. Boone, hair white as snow, back stooped from years, moved slow to the table. He set down an old bottle of whiskey, poured 2 glasses, and fixed Bear with tired, troubled eyes. Jonas, there's something you need to know, he said low. Among those businessmen who rode in, there was a man you know. Bear's dark, eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Boone's hands shook as he stroked his beard. His name's Elias Ward. He came with Blackthorne. But once he was your comrade in the war with Mexico. The glass stilled in Bear's grip. That name, long buried under ash and silence, rang clear as gunfire. Elias Ward, the man who had fought shoulder to shoulder with him, who had sworn never to leave a brother behind. Bear's heart twisted. Memories crashed in. The thunder of cannons, the screams of dying men, Elias's steady eyes as they charged through hell together. And now, Elias wrote again, draped in the false skin of a businessman, siding with Blackthorn to strip Dust Creek bare. No, Bear rasped. Elias would never betray. Boone's voice carried sorrow, but no doubt. I saw him myself, Jonas. Taking Blackthorn's money, talking of buying farms. That man isn't the brother you once knew. Bear's fists clenched, knuckles cracking like dry timber. The scar on his cheek twitched, dragging back every memory of blood and betrayal. Inside him, a storm raged, between the bond of brotherhood and the cruel truth of treachery. The sheriff laid a heavy hand on his shoulder. Jonas, be ready. If Elias stands with Blackthorn, sooner or later you'll have to face him. In the lamplight, Bear's shadow wavered against the wall, trembling for a heartbeat, then hardening like stone. He knew fate had dealt its hand, and the foe he dreaded most wasn't Silas Blackthorn. It was the brother he once trusted with his life. If you were there, whose side would you take? A. Jonas Bear Callahan, the old soldier clinging to his oath. B. Elias Ward, the comrade turned traitor, now riding with Blackthorn. Or would you choose another? Share your thoughts. I want to know you're still riding with this story. That afternoon, a heavy air hung over Dust Creek. From afar, the shadow of Silas Blackthorn rode closer to the crooked shack where Jonas Bear Callahan lived. Dust clung thick to his long black coat, but the smirk on his lips was clean and sharp. Bear stood on the porch, revolver resting on the table. He knew Blackthorn would come, and the outlaw hadn't kept him waiting long. Jonas Callahan, Blackthorn hissed, each word like a knife. I've heard plenty about your tragedy. Your wife and child burned in that fire. Shameful. But you know what they say? That blaze was your fault. If you'd been home that night, maybe they'd still be alive. The words cut deep. Bear froze, pain searing through him like hot iron. Wounds he thought turned to ash roared back into flame. His massive hands curled into fists, but he gave no reply. Only silence. His eyes locked on Blackthorn. The outlaw leaned in, voice hard as steel. You can hide out here on the edge of Dust Creek, hauntin' like a ghost all these years. But me, I don't forget. And I'll see you burn, same as that fire that took your kin. With a tug on the reins, Blackthorn spun his horse, his bitter laughter trailing in the wind, leaving Bear gutted open by the past. When night fell, Elsie May appeared. She saw it in his eyes, clouded, heavy, like the world had crumbled on his shoulders once more. Bear, she whispered, clutching her wooden horse. Maybe I should give you this. From her worn satchel, she pulled a letter, yellowed with age, its edges singed. It's from my mama. I never dared open it, but tonight, I think you need it. Bear's rough hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. Scrawled words surfaced. The fire at the Callahan Ranch was no accident. We know another hand lit it. His heart clenched. Each word tore through the fog he'd lived in for years. He looked up, voice grave. Elsie, your mama wrote this? She knew something about that fire? The girl nodded, eyes glistening. I don't understand it all, but she feared a group of men, and she believed you were a victim, same as us. In that moment, the pieces snapped together. Bear's tragedy, Elsie's past, and the shadow of Blackthorn. The fire wasn't fate. It was part of something darker, a thread binding two broken lives. Bear's grip tightened on the letter. Flames rose inside him, not of grief but of truth yet to be claimed. That night, Dust Creek lay under a strange hush. Crickets sang in the grasslands. Wind howled through the far canyons. Inside the shack, Bear sat alone, eyes locked on the scorched letter. Its words smoldered in his chest. For years he had lived dead, hiding, letting the town fend for itself. But now the truth glared back. His pain was tied to a crime. One Blackthorn and his kind had sown. The door creaked. Sheriff Caleb Boone stepped in, his bent frame casting a long shadow in the lamplight. In his hand, something gleamed, a silver deputy's badge. "Jonas," Boone said, voice low, shaky but firm. "It's time you chose. Dust Creek's standin' on the edge. Folks may fear you, but they need you. You once defended this place. You still can." Bear stared at the badge, his broad hand trembling. That piece of metal carried a past he'd buried deep. He remembered the scorn in people's eyes, the whispers each time he walked by. Did they truly want him back? Then Elsie stepped from behind Boone, clutching her wooden horse tight. "Bear," her voice rang steady, stronger than any sermon, "I don't believe you're a ghost. I believe you're the man who can protect Dust Creek." Her words fanned the fire inside him. Bear reached out, took the badge. The metal was cold against his skin, but inside he felt a heat he thought long gone, the warmth of duty, of trust placed back in his hands. Boone smiled, nodding slow. "Then we'll stand together. The people will follow you, Jonas." And so the next morning, when Bear strode down Main Street, the silver star shining on his chest, the wary eyes of the townsfolk shifted. First to whispers, then to silence, then to nods. They saw it. His eyes no longer drowned in shadow, but burning with the fire of a man ready to defend them. The same community that once cast him aside now closed ranks behind him. Against the storm called Blackthorn, Dust Creek had found its pillar again. Jonas Bear Callahan, once forgotten, now stood as the town's hope. If you were there, whose side would you take? A. Jonas Bear Callahan, the cowboy risen to defend his town. B. Sheriff Caleb Boone, the old lawman who passed down his trust. Or would you choose another? Share your thoughts. I want to know you're still riding with this story. The sun had yet to rise, but Dust Creek was already ringing with urgent church bells. From the mountain's foot, clouds of dust curled high, heralding the riders of Blackthorn's gang pressing in. Word spread fast. Fear clawed at the townsfolk, but this time they did not run. They gathered under the command of Jonas Bear Callahan, the same man they once shunned, now their only anchor. Bear stood tall in the square, his deep voice steady as stone. "The church will be our stronghold. Board up every window with wood and sandbags. Women and children inside. Men, cover the roads." Shaking hands hardened into will. The old hauled boards, the young stacked sacks. Horses were hidden, weapons passed out. Old rifles, axes, even shovels. Amid the panic, Bear loomed unshaken, his voice the heartbeat of the town. Sheriff Caleb Boone stood beside him, his eyes burning bright for the first time in years. The old man was no longer bent and weary. He looked reborn as Dust Creek united. While the town labored, Elsie May crept to Bear's side. She held out a small stone, crudely drawn upon, a big man holding the hand of a little girl. "I made this for you," she whispered, voice soft but sure. "It'll bring you luck, so you'll never have to fight alone." Bear froze. His rough hands trembled as he took it. He stared at the clumsy drawing, simple, yet carved with unshaken trust. An orphan who once had nothing but a wooden horse now gave him back the faith he had lost. "Thank you, Elsie," he said hoarsely, tucking the stone into his shirt pocket, right above his heart. That heavy heart now beat with one more reason to endure. Outside, hoofbeats thundered closer. Blackthorn's whistles cut through the air like wolves howling. But inside the town, instead of despair, walls of defense rose. Church doors barred shut. Streets blockaded with wagons and timber. Jonas Bear Callahan lifted his head, the silver star gleaming on his chest. His roar split the morning air. Dust Creek is our home, and today, no one takes it from us. A cry erupted, stronger than fear, sharper than doubt. Dust Creek had turned into a fortress, lit by a child's faith and a ghost's resolve. Then gunfire split the sky. Smoke swallowed the streets. Blackthorn's gang charged like wolves, horses screaming, iron hooves tearing the red dirt. Townsfolk clung to barricades, firing desperate but defiant shots. Bear led the line, revolver blazing true, each round a wall against the storm. Sheriff Boone, though aged, stood at the church steps, his rifle trembling in his grip, but his eyes burning like fire. But in the chaos, a gap burst open. Raiders poured from the east alley, a path meant to be sealed with wagons and sand. They swarmed, surrounding both sides. Bear roared, "We're exposed! Who left the east alley open?" In that instant, Boone's weary eyes caught a figure at the shadow's edge. Deputy Thomas Pike. The young man's hand flicked signals to Blackthorn's men, his gaze glittering with betrayal. Boone staggered. "Lord Almighty! It's you?" His voice cracked. Thomas stepped forward, mask dropped. "Sheriff," he sneered, "times have changed. You're old, Dust Creek is broke. Blackthorn offered me land, money. You think I'd turn that down?" His words struck like a knife in every back. Gasps rose, curses broke. Boone's face folded into sorrow and fury. "I trusted you like my own son, Thomas. And you'd sell Dust Creek for filthy silver?" Thomas shrugged, pistol aimed straight at Boone. "You don't get it, old man. I ride with the strong, and strength don't come from ghosts like Callahan." The gun cracked. Boone staggered, a bullet tearing his shoulder, blood spilling as he crumpled into the red dirt. Shouts erupted, the town's defense wavering. Bear bellowed, rage blazing in his eyes. He charged, dragging Boone back behind cover, the sheriff's shirt soaked crimson. "Stay with me, Sheriff. Don't quit now." Boone grit his teeth, bloodied hand clutching Bear's badge tight, pressing it back into his chest. "It's on you now, Jonas. Keep Dust Creek standing." But betrayal had carved a deep wound. The balance tipped toward Blackthorn. The townsfolk trembled, faces pale, wondering if they had strength left to hold the line. If you were there, whose side would you take? A. Jonas Bear Callahan, vowing to protect Dust Creek to his final breath. B. Deputy Thomas Pike, the traitor who sold his soul for money and land. Or would you choose another? Share your thoughts. I want to know you're still riding with this story. Red dust choked the main street of Dust Creek. The gunfire faded to silence, leaving only the shrieks of horses and the cries of men fleeing into the prairie. As the smoke cleared, every eye fixed on two figures standing across from each other in the heart of town. Jonas Bear Callahan and Silas Blackthorn. Bear staggered, his shirt torn to rags, his shoulder slick with blood. Yet his gaze did not waver. Blackthorn, cloaked in his black duster, smirked, venom flashing in his eyes. "You think you can save Dust Creek?" Blackthorn growled, spinning his revolver on a finger. "You're nothing but a ghost crawling out, of ashes. Today I'll bury you, and this town with you." Bear answered with silence, drawing in a steady breath. The prairie wind tore through, whipping the dust into spirals. Around them, the townsfolk froze, breaths held tight. Sheriff Boone, blood dripping from his wound, leaned against a wall, his eyes urging Bear on, and little Elsie clutched her painted stone to her chest, whispering prayers. Blackthorn stepped closer, boots pounding the dirt, eyes gleaming with challenge. "Shoot, Callahan. Let's see what's left of you." The moment stretched thin, eternity balanced on 10 paces of dirt. One man fueled by greed and shadows, another scarred, but lifted by the faith of a child and the hope of a town. The wind howled like a signal horn. Both guns flared. A single shot cracked the silence apart. Blackthorn jerked, his pistol falling limp. Blood bloomed across his chest. His eyes widened in disbelief before his body toppled heavy into the dust, raising a final cloud of red. Bear dropped to one knee, breath ragged, his shoulder bleeding. Yet he pushed himself upright, revolver still in hand, his eyes blazing with fire. Silence hung. Then the first cheer broke, then another, until the whole town roared. Blackthorn's men, seeing their leader fallen, scattered like startled wolves, tossing guns, abandoning horses, fleeing into the endless prairie. Dust Creek was free. The townsfolk surged forward, surrounding Bear. Their eyes no longer carried fear or suspicion, only gratitude, only awe. Bear wiped sweat and blood from his brow, lifting his gaze to the sky glowing with the fire of dusk. He was no longer the ghost they whispered about. In that moment, Jonas Bear Callahan became the town's protector, by his own blood and will. The next morning, Dust Creek woke to a rare peace. Sunlight streamed through cottonwoods, falling on rooftops still charred by smoke. People worked quietly, patching fences, clearing debris, burying the fallen. But in their eyes shone something long lost, belief that Dust Creek had a future. Jonas Bear Callahan stood before his old shack, no longer a figure of solitude. Beside him was Elsie May, her tangled hair shining in the light, her wooden horse still in her arms. Together they looked at the new plank of wood Bear had nailed above the porch. He had carved it himself, each stroke driving away ghosts of the past. On it were the words, "Callahan and Elsie, home." Elsie's wide eyes filled with wonder. "Bear, does this mean I really have a home?" Bear bent low, his scarred, weathered face breaking into a rare, gentle smile. His broad hands rested on her small shoulders. "Not just a home, Elsie. From now on, you have a family. I'll be your father, and I swear, you'll never be lost again." Tears welled in Elsie's eyes as she threw her arms around him. That fragile embrace carried the weight of every lonely year. Bear closed his eyes, holding her tight, feeling her small heartbeat like a miracle against the stone walls of his own. The people of Dust Creek paused to witness. Those who once whispered and turned away now bowed their heads. They no longer saw a haunted giant. They saw a father. They saw a guardian. Sheriff Boone, his shoulder bandaged, stepped forward. He nodded with quiet pride. "Jonas, you've come back at last." The wooden sign glistened in the morning sun. Callahan and Elsie, home, was more than a name. It was a promise. The ghost of Dust Creek had become not only a father to one orphan child, but the protector of an entire town. And out across the prairie, the wind carried the sound of church bells, not a toll for the dead, but a peal for new beginnings. A ghost had found his light. Perhaps Dust Creek will forever remember that moment, when a forsaken cowboy found a home again, and an orphan child found a father. Life on the frontier was cruel, but even in ashes, hope can take root. And in a heart thought turned to stone, love can still rise. What about you, friend? If you had stood in that square, would you have placed your faith in Bear or chosen another path? Tell me in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone you care about. Each click from you is what keeps me writing back with more tales of grit, grace, and second chances.